Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel session, Reinventing Life in European Cities through Open Data and a Human-Centric Approach. My name is Elisar Bashir, Senior Analyst at Cullen International. I also have the pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. Data is the lifeblood of economic development, with an expected volume of 175 zettabytes by 2025. This is what the European Commission notes in its data strategy from February 2020. At the same time, in order to truly capitalize on the potential of such vast amounts of data, a successful digital and green transformation should follow a human-centric approach to best serve the needs of citizens. Our discussion today will focus on three key questions. One, how data generated from connected infrastructures, public services, and citizens can be used to gain valuable insights and improve our daily lives. Two, what challenges remain when it comes to data sharing, data collection, data availability overall. Also, what policies and instruments can be applied to address those challenges. Three, what opportunities lie ahead when it comes to making the best use of data and foster collaborative initiatives for a green and digital transformation of our urban environments. To address these and other questions, we have the pleasure to hear from our 5 special guest speakers today. Eddie Hartog, Head of Unit Technologies for Smart Communities at DigiConnect in the European Commission. Theo Blackwell, Chief Digital Officer for the Mayor of London. Mikko Rusama, Chief Digital Officer for the City of Helsinki. Eamon Hughes, Vice President for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, Open Blue Digital at Johnson Controls. And Jeremy Rollison, Director of EU Government Affairs at Microsoft Europe. Now, before we hear from our speakers, I would like to remind our audience to be active. Please do interact with us, send us your questions via the chat box so that we can have a lively and engaging discussion. Our colleagues from Forum Europe will make sure to facilitate this. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the first of our speakers, Eddie Hartog. Eddie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisa, for that introduction. And I'm delighted to be here with you online, unfortunately, but in this very distinguished panel. Now, when I read the invitation and the description that you just gave, there's two things that immediately came to my mind. One is, it dates years back, an experience that one of our former commissioners, Nelly Cruz, had attending a campus party. And she was talking to a 14-year-old who had done some technological discovery. And she said, "Oh, that's great. Don't tell anyone, keep it to yourself and go for intellectual property rights straight away." And he looked at her and he said, "Well, madame, you may come from a different era, but if I do not join the group and share my information, this idea will never mature into something real." So it's the joining and sharing attitude, which is the new state of mind in a way that we need in this digital era. And that also applies to the data. Second experience was quite more recently when I discussed with the Australian Smart City Council, and we were talking about all sorts of techie stuff. And they said, what we realized talking to political leaders, what they want is, the smart parking gadget, or measuring CO2 emissions of individuals, or controlling the smart grid with an app. Those sort of applications are very visible. Where you then say, okay, but could I now get a bit of money to invest in the engine room to actually set up a digital platform that brings all of that together on which you build the applications? It's not very sexy, and it costs money, and it takes time to build that sort of holistic system, if you like. And what we found is that when you then say, well, how about the data that are behind the gadget, and can we share that, and can we format that together? That resonates with them. They understand that. And even more, if you then visualize it in a local digital twin, they say, ah, yeah, now I can see what you mean, even though they still don't want to look at the engine room. So it's a conversation to be had with political leaders that we need to set the scene right. Now, this is what we tried to do in the European Union, where we had conversations preparing for the current financial period. Like, what do? We do a lot of replication, great ideas, and then we do good practice seminars and all that sort of thing. But we said what we really need is to have a common vision of all 80,000 European municipalities representing 450 million people, because that is probably a good scale to do something to develop. So that is why we got the political leaders to sign up on a declaration. Not all 80,000 have done that yet, by the way, but we have a way to go. But to say, well, what are the shared principles that we will work with over the coming period? What sort of technical specifications do we need to make this work? And how do we actually monitor and measure the progress? Now, this is an exercise that started around a year and a half ago in Oulu first, and then in a formal declaration ceremony in Porto, where we created this movement called living-in.eu, where we all say, let's do this together and let's have that common vision. That's also what the value added of the European Union is, because I don't represent a city, I don't represent a tech company, but I represent a political entity that is, a couple of layers remote from the direct city life. So that is what we try to do, to build this interoperability framework. The idea is to build a local network, a network of local digital twins, and then really provide all the necessary tools from the European Union for each municipality to contribute to that. And I would like to emphasize that each municipality, even those that only have 6,000 inhabitants and can't afford people like Miko and Theo on a full-time salary, should be able to participate in this exercise, or it should be inclusive. So maybe as an introduction, it gives you a bit of this perspective what we would like to do in the next 5 to 7 years.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Indeed, joining and sharing attitude in this era is what applies to data. This is what I hear from your introductory remarks. Now I would like to pass the floor to Theo, who will share his perspective. Theo, you have the floor now.
Well, thank you so much. And it's very interesting to hear Eddie's comments. My name's Theo Blackwell. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for London. So I was appointed about 3.5 years ago to bring together London's vision around the use of data and smart cities and innovation. And of course, London is not just a big city of 9 million people. It's also made up of 32 entities, 32 boroughs, municipal level, and how we work together and join up information so that we can take action is extremely important to the Mayor of London, and of course, with the recovery of our city. So we've been on a journey from, let's say, around 2010, when we created the London Data Store, our open data platform, from open data and championing that to how we build on top of that legacy and add our experience capabilities around secure data and data that comes from sensors into the mix, so that we can join up data and give it to those who can make the biggest difference around it. So currently we are in a design process around London's new data store, not to create a new data warehouse that would bring everything together in London, but actually create something that effectively links sovereign data bodies together, so that when we need to share data, and sometimes we need to share sensitive data, we can do that effectively. So think of it almost like a library index card, or certainly like library index card. When I went to university some decades ago, where you would, if you need to find a piece of data and where it's held, you'd go to the index and it would tell you where that information was. And so then you could strike up a data sharing agreement and proceed from that basis. So linking things together is at the core of our approach. And of course, along our journey, we have, and the more we've used secure data and sensor data, the more we've engaged with the public, whether it is around the use of anonymized Wi-Fi data gathered from people's mobile phones to understand busyness on the London Underground, to the sharing of health data with Londoners, and testing their tolerance on how third parties might use that data, anonymized data, to develop new research in medicines and cures. And along our journey, we've also created new specific data tools. So going from a kind of passive publishing platform to deeper data projects like Safe Stats, which supports our understanding of violent crime, infrastructure mapping, which allows us to coordinate construction digs, so people dig up the road once when they're putting in utilities and buildings. Our planning data hub, which allows us to see a full view of the city's planning infrastructure. And during the crisis, high streets data, which solved the problem of us really trying to understand what was going on in the economics of our city. We previously only had data from the government, which would give us a monthly or quarterly take. But by combining private sector data sets with feeds from CCTV cameras and other sources of government data, we were able to get a very, very granular picture of how people were spending money in parts of the city and how movement patterns were impacting the local economies of a city that has 600 high streets. So that level of granularity that enabled us to bring in MasterCard data and mobile data and combine it with the rich data sources we already had was really, really important in decision making. So to wrap up, I think our journey from a kind of uncurated publishing platform around city data to something that is more curated necessitates deeper thinking around governance, about reviewing our commitments to each other as a city and with entities in the city about joining up data, to create greater understanding with the private sector and with research institutions about the opportunities of really deep projects together, to create new charters around data governance and emerging technologies as they roll out. And I call this agile governance, the ability of the city to bring together its experience and formulate rules and guides so that people know what the right thing to do is when they're developing that. And that's very much living the spirit behind GDPR, not just the letter of GDPR. And fundamentally, our work on data has to be governed by our recovery principles for the city, and that is the green transition. So as we move to build our capacity for curated data projects, these will underpin our approach to the green transition and making London an even better place to live, work, and visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo, for such an enlightening introductory remark. Indeed, agile governments, the level of granularity and transparency on the side of local governments at the core of really capitalizing on the potential of data. Let's hear now from Mikko and what the city of Helsinki is doing in that regard.
Hi everybody, I'm Mikko Rusama. I'm the first Chief Digital Officer at the city of Helsinki, started 3 years ago. It's a beautiful day here in Helsinki. Our city strategy states that the city of Helsinki wants to be the most functional city in the world that makes the best use of digitalization. Digitalization is not a target, but a means of becoming a more functional city. And we believe in two very important paradigm shifts. Firstly, we believe that we should transform from a reactive to proactive service delivery. And secondly, we should move from outright exploitation of personal data to human-centric use of data. I don't mean that cities have been exploiting personal data, but if you look at how social media companies in many cases have been using our data, you could call it has been close to exploitation. And as a public servant, as public organization, we want to show example how to be human-centric in the data use. If we talk about this first paradigm shift from reactive to proactive service delivery, it means that we are flipping the service delivery model from pull to push by anticipating needs and automatically triggering personalized services using context awareness. So my argument is that if city has an obligation to provide a statutory service and citizen is eligible for that, and we have all the data plus permission to use the data, I think we should provide services automatically or at least recommend the most suitable service. And as an example, we have been introduced a new service. We are able to offer preschool placement with an SMS message. And last January, we offered preschool placement to parents of 6-year-olds, 5,600 families in total, and 89% of the parents approved the placement simply by responding text message. So earlier it took 2 months to fulfill a paper form or an online form. Now it's done in 1 minute. So parents get confirmation of the placement in 1 minute. So this is a remarkable change. But this kind of proactive approach is not possible if we are not moving to more human-centric use of data. So we have very strict regulation. I mean, EU privacy laws, GDPR is a starting point. But even more important question is that do people trust us with their data and let us use data and AI for their benefit? So I have been discussing a lot with Theo about the democratic mandate cities have, and I claim that we should operate in a very transparent, responsible way and respect citizens' rights, privacy, and safety in everything we do. So because without trust, there is no use for AI. And what Helsinki is now doing, we are implementing so-called my data principles in practice. We want to empower individuals with their personal data. It means that people should be given opportunity to give or deny or revoke consent for the data use. And this is very important principle. If you look at the EU privacy GDPR, there are 6 legal bases for data processing. It could be based on legal obligation, contract, or consent. And this My Data Operator capability, implementing that means that we provide better visibility for residents or people on what data we have stored about them and what has been the legal basis for data processing. And in case of consent, we maintain the kind of give them opportunity to give consent or revoke consent. And this is a very fundamental change we are implementing, and we are closely collaborating with Open Agile Smart Cities Commission. I believe that this approach we are taking here in Helsinki is very much in line with the objectives of the Commission. And this practical implementation helps identify many of the challenges we are facing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikko. Well, from reactive approach to a more proactive attitude, and from ultra exploitation to a more human-centric approach in order to achieve a trustworthy data sharing and actively engage citizens. This is what I heard from your introductory remarks. Now let's move to Iman. And let's hear what Johnson Controls is doing in the context of improving our lives in a smart city. Iman, sorry, we can't hear you.
$5 in the bucket then. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this time in the event. Just very briefly on Johnson Controls, some people might not know about Johnson Controls, but we transform the environments where people live, work, and play. As a global leader in smart, healthy, and sustainable buildings, our mission is to reimagine the performance of buildings to serve people, places, and the planet. We have a vast history of 135 years operating through innovation, and 100,000 experts in more than 150 countries. So we operate in a lot of cities, undertake a lot of smart city projects and so on, with the largest portfolio of building technology and software as a service solutions. My role is to expand the OpenBlue digital business in the Europe, Middle East, Africa, Latin America region, a vast region, as you can imagine. But I am also the GM for Ireland. I'm responsible for the global headquarters of Johnson Controls in Cork City in Ireland, where I am based and where I am today. And that office sits in the heart of the city. So we're very much a part of the city. And what we do with our building in the context of the city is very important to us as a company. If you can move to the next slide, please. I'm going to just briefly touch in the introduction on three elements relating to cities: climate policy, sustainability, and smart buildings, and how they all impact together, what can be done in cities, and the way cities can achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions and goals. If you can move to the next one, please. This is a very interesting element because as a company, as I say, we work in many cities and municipalities, and we did a breadth of research with over 800 mayor offices, municipalities, and we found three constant themes that were very relevant for communities and cities: secure, connected, and resilience. These were the elements that kept coming up. And we asked what drives that in cities, and there were six areas that came to the fore. The environments needed to be adaptive. Sustainability was a key agenda item, reducing emissions, making these cities a healthy places to be. Resiliency, and this is pre-COVID, amid the impacts of climate change and economic change, was a big theme. Efficiency and budgetary elements, economic vibrancy, having that vibrancy within the cities, and the proliferation of IoT and connected devices. So data was a huge element, and being able to have a connected society, a connected city, was extremely important. I was really interested to hear Eddie talking about the Digital Twin initiative, connecting the municipalities on that, and also what Theo was saying about what's happening in London with the open data elements, driving that connectivity in the city community. If you move on, please. We can't take any of this in context without referring to climate policy, and climate policy from the big governmental areas like European Union, UK as well, and North America. And we see these policies coming really thick and fast. They're very important. We all know that because of the scientific proof that's there relating to the climate impact. And these climate policies, along with the impact of the pandemic, have driven, things like, the Green Fund and so on and so forth. And one of the big elements to come out of that is the relief funds of the European Union and the US in particular, where we see the Resilience and Next Gen EU fund coming out with, say, 672 billion euros of incentive. And these are very targeted at green and digital. If you move on. Just to give a context of a company like Johnson Controls and what it means for us as a sustainability. So we're very serious about it. It's a big agenda item for us as a company. And I'm not just talking about us in isolation. It's a very big agenda item for all the major corporates that are operating in the cities all around the world, in your cities, in the cities of Europe. And for us, it's so important. We've signed up for the climate pledge. So we're going for reaching net zero 10 years before the UN Paris Agreement, which is 2050. We're going for 2040. And, one of the recent things that we've done in Singapore is we've invested $50 million to create the first new build net zero carbon building in our innovation center in Singapore. So for us, it's a really important thing to do to make that contribution as an organization, as a company, but also in the cities that we operate in. And if you could move to the next slide. This is some McKinsey research which illustrates the fact that there are very, very big imperatives for corporations to move down the sustainability road. There's near-term stakes, so profit is impacted directly by the companies that are taking this seriously and that are addressing it. The environmental regulation, the climate policy needs to be paid attention to and addressed. The investor relations and sustainability requirements coming from the investor community is top line agenda item now. So investors and funds want to invest in green companies and companies that are playing their part from a climate change point of view. And then we have shifting customer expectations. We have customers that want to do business with companies that have a strong sustainability agenda. And of course, the big thing in cities is the talent that we attract into the cities. I know in our building in Cork City, we're very proud of the fact that, we've made it an environment whereby we can attract talent into that building to make it a great place to work in a great city. And I know that's what a lot of cities are aiming to try and do. If you move to the next slide. The thing I want to say here is that digitization is and I think it's an untapped pathway at the moment. I think we're starting on this journey. Technology is enabling us, and it's a confluence of the different technologies that are enabling us to move now on this. But if you look at cities and you look at the proliferation of buildings, of course, there are tons of buildings in cities, and a lot of those are corporate commercial buildings, as well as governmental and so on. But they account for 41% of the primary energy consumption. So there's a big target to go after. And of course, from a corporate point of view, you have many elements like the LEED certifications, the neighbors, the BREEAM. So all of these are targets saying for our building in Cork City is a gold standard LEED. We're very proud of it. It's a highly sustainable building, and a lot of projects we work on, we have clients that are working to those standards because they want to have that kind of sustainability net zero type of footprint in the cities that they operate in. And of course, the legislation leads to that as well. If we move on, please. What I want to say here is that, look, there's a new way. I mean, Theo touched on it. The challenge that CDOs have in this environment is how to harness the data. And that's the big challenge. And there is a new way, but it involves connecting a lot of different data sources and different data elements, particularly when you consider buildings. And you got to organize that data. And once that data is organized, you can do very good things like digital twinning and so on and so forth. But the platform, the capability needs to be there to do that. And what you see happening now is these platforms, coming together, new platforms, taking the operational technology world, traditional world of buildings and equipment in buildings and plant utilities in buildings and so on into the technology world. So with that, I'll go to the next slide and conclude. Just to refresh, climate policy is driving the sustainability initiatives in cities. There's no doubt about that. The highest return, I would say, is tackling the buildings in cities, as we have 41% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from buildings total. That's global. And of course, digitization and data is the pathway to success. But that is now driven by a combination of technologies such as IoT, cloud, big data analytics, and it's all of these technologies together fusing the old worlds of the operational technology and IT is where we really can make a big impact. And with that, I'll finish at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iman. Indeed, great takeaways to finish your introductory remarks. Digitization still an untapped potential for some of the climate change agenda points. Now let's hear from Jeremy and the perspective of Microsoft on how data, still an untapped potential, can be at the heart of solving some of the most pressing challenges we're facing. Jeremy?
Well, thank you. And I think that is a good way to say it. I've been excited listening to some of the presentations here and excited to be able to be here today. So thanks again for the opportunity. At Microsoft, it was over a year ago, and we had been planning this before the pandemic. But the pandemic, of course, changed some of those plans. But it was in April of a year ago that we announced our launch of an open data campaign, which was a global campaign aimed at addressing what we see as this emerging data divide. Data, as you mentioned, is going to be core to so many of the future technologies that I know companies like ours and other sectors are going through with their own digital transformations. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about the powers of the cloud, we talk about all of the different learnings that we can get from the additional data that's being created from all of the different sensors, from all of the different practices and exercises that we're all doing. I think we all understand well the value of that data, but the real value kind of resides in the results in the outcomes of the data. Data in and of itself isn't necessarily valuable unless it has the right talent and the right tools applied to it. And so with the open data campaign that we launched, I think we're aiming at trying to bridge what we see emerging as a data divide, where an increasing amount of data is concentrated in the hands of certain companies, certain jurisdictions. And the risk there is that the benefits that can be had through that data, especially when we're talking about societal challenges that have come up here today, you want to make sure that those benefits are distributed as widely as possible, where we think it can have the most benefit. So we've committed over the past year to launching several different data collaborations that kind of highlight the possibilities that can be had when people work together on data. I think the premise of where we start from is that the companies of the future, projects of the future, we believe that they're going to be those that are most open. Data sharing, I think, is a very loaded word, and there's many, many different scenarios that are captured in that type of context. It doesn't mean that anyone and everyone needs to just be 100% completely open with their data and make it available for everyone else to use. There are scenarios where that makes a lot of sense, and we've contributed data sets to that effect. And there's a number of projects, particularly when we talk about public sector initiatives and leveraging open data, where data can be made available for reuse for others to put their own creativity and cooperation on that to drive new outcomes that then really unlocks a lot of that data value that I mentioned earlier. But there are a number of other scenarios where it's one-to-one scenarios between competitors, scenarios between businesses and governments, which we've talked about a little bit here today. All of these things, the more open that we can be with the data, I think is going to drive a lot more of that success. I think we believe that when you think about technologies like AI, it's unlikely that any company, any one company or any one entity on their own has enough data to be successful at AI development. It's going to require collaboration. It's going to require bringing in different types of talent and different types of tools to really unlock the value that can be found and the insights that can be found in some of those data sets that, again, are better when you have more eyes and ears contributing to something like that. So we've stood up, we're committed to standing up 20 data collaborations by 2022 that kind of exemplify much of what I've discussed, where collaboration can lead to societal benefits that citizens and different companies, different entities can all benefit from. We've released principles that will guide those data collaborations and similar collaborations that we would like to hopefully inspire others to emulate. And we're, of course, developing tools and products that make it easier to share data and collaborate on data. And we'll be continuing to do that for the next year. Looking at some of the participants today, I was really happy to hear Theo and Eamon speak earlier. This is about collaboration and partnerships. And I know Microsoft has been engaged with both the City of London, with Johnson Controls, on the latter with our Azure Digital Twins initiative, and with the City of London, some really exciting data collaborations that we were very, very happy to contribute to. very much looking at timely challenges like the COVID pandemic, leveraging data, leveraging city sensors to be able to map out movements of people and how they respond to different COVID measures to help better inform policymakers as they need to respond real time to the challenges that we've all seen over the crisis. Leveraging data sets as well for the health side of this, contributing data from research in the US to research in Europe to help better identify, certain aspects of immune responses to diseases. We could go on, but in the context of cities in particular, I think this is something that the European Commission has recognized. I think we have a lot of great case studies from an open data perspective of where private companies and city officials and researchers can collaborate on projects that benefit not just city dwellers or those living in those cities, but can be case studies that inspire others in other parts of the world, other parts of Europe to do the same. I think the Open Data Directive and what it calls for from policymakers, we think is a great start to that. We're also very supportive of the European Strategy for Data, which does recognize this opportunity to close that data divide and to achieve more by collaborating further and making data more open and more available for reuse so that we can bring in those different ideas and really leverage the benefits of that for everyone, not just for private companies and their competitiveness, but for, again, many of the societal challenges that we all face. It's been mentioned here, sustainability. We've talked a bit about the pandemic. I think those are two pretty concrete examples recently where enhanced data collaboration and better access to data can definitely drive benefits that will be much, much wider than only a handful of players, but can be open by default, ideally, in the end, and be reused and improved. So we're excited about what can be done with data collaboration. We're excited to work with partners and cities, with other companies, even with some of our competitors, to demonstrate what can be achieved when data is made available for reuse. It's more open, and we take an approach that really focuses on that type of collaboration to drive some of the exciting insights and value that can be unlocked from that data and for it to have the widest benefit possible. So I'll stop there and look forward to answering any questions.
Many thanks, Jeremy. Actually, a very exciting segue to a question I was, while I was listening to you, wanted to address to all of you, since we have a great line of speakers following these introductory remarks and taking note from Jeremy's message about data collaboration leading to societal benefits with some key principles behind it. I would like to ask a question to the whole panel. How does a successful model of collaboration actually look for you? And if you have one message or wish, if you'd like, so that there is a thriving ecosystem with all stakeholders engaged, what would that message be? Also, feel free to provide any examples. We heard from Jeremy what Microsoft is doing. We also heard from Eamon, but also what is the Commission doing in terms of fostering such collaboration and really nurture a thriving ecosystem. Anyone willing to be the first one to take the question?
Well, I can start.
Please go ahead, Mikko.
So how does a successful model of collaboration looks like? So I believe that, firstly, I need to say that successful multi-stakeholder collaboration always difficult. So it's easy to talk about the collaboration and everybody's nodding heads, but to make it really work, it takes a lot of effort. But it is still very extremely valuable. So we have to encourage all actors in the ecosystem to actively enter the work of each other. So if we do not understand what are the challenges and problems we try to solve, it's very difficult to collaborate. We need to find the common objectives. So it's easy to say that, invite others to say, come here and look what we are doing. But to really actively contribute takes much more effort and requires personal relationships and building up trust and linking people at different levels of the organization. But the success, if we are successful, I believe that city of Helsinki is flourishing and Europe will be flourishing because data is flowing freely. Data is flowing on people's terms and creating sustaining competitive advantage to all of Europe. Thanks.
Thanks, Mikko. Yes, Theo?
Yeah, so I mean, I totally agree with Mikko that it is a difficult thing to have large collaborative projects, but where they've worked in London, especially with private sector, private-public data sharing, is that we've put a lot of work right at the start over question definition. And that might sound a bit odd. It's actually not the technology part of this. It's about the human beings getting together and saying, this is the problem we want to solve. And the attendant key questions and problems, both big and small, that data can provide an answer to, or can certainly provide value to. So that discipline of bringing people together and defining the question is totally key for data projects. And sometimes I just sort of emphasize that, because sometimes we think about data as just the gathering of lots of data in one place, rather than the use of data for a particular purpose. I would also say that at the moment, there is what's also necessary for collaboration and sets the right context for it is a shared purpose. And at the moment, as cities bounce back from the ravages economically and health-wise of the pandemic, we have a shared purpose between business and between public institutions around this. And this is also manifest in more common agreement around climate change challenges between boards of businesses and democratically elected leaders of cities and citizens. So there's an opportunity here to create, to open the doors for that discussion around key questions more than I think 18 months ago.
Eddie?
Yeah, maybe I would like to rejoin Theo on that shared purpose thing, because one of the elements of conversations we've had, and I focus now a little bit on the political leaders, was always they all want something digital, but then they all want just something else. And I think this COVID pandemic, I think it's the first time in history that, at least in the European Union, all mayors, all political leaders were focused on only one thing, and that is to fight the pandemic and then hopefully recover properly afterwards. Whereas the Green Deal is equally urgent, but when you then dissect it, one says, I would like to focus on upgrading my buildings. The next one says, I want to focus on my energy grid. And the third one has a mobility issue. And then all of a sudden it becomes disjoint. And then you ask, what would the success then look like? For me, it's very simple. We started with that vision and not with projects, because the history of European Union has very much been, we do all sorts of research projects, and then we hope that they gel and they survive the challenge of time, if you see what I mean. But often when the project is finished, then we go on to the next thing. So this time we decided to work from a common vision and a common political statement, not induced by legislation, but by a voluntary movement at mayoral level, at city level, through this Living in .eu movement, where we say we need to scale this. We could even go to joint procurement to bring this about, to really see how this works, because even a city of London is small in a global context. We in the end, in Africa, we will be looking at 30, 50 million people cities. So it's a different game. So we need to scale this. We need to bring it in perspective based on a number of similar values. And that's where I think a European Union of 450 million is the right scale and also provides the right framework to do this in. So my measure of success would be to have at least 2/3 of the 80,000 European municipalities join the movement, work with us on this common vision through a number of projects. And there are a lot of good projects. I mean, I won't mention Helsinki in European Union, but there's the Copenhagen City Data Exchange, wonderful stuff. They do fantastic stuff in Rennes on an urban data interface. What I think is important in South Holland, so that is one of the provinces of the Netherlands, they actually do it together between cities. So they designed it to do it in cities. I mean, yeah, question to Theo, what do you not need the data from Liverpool and Manchester if you want to deploy algorithms? The answer would probably be yes, I would, but not in a UK-wide database, but in a meshed way. I think I like this idea of linking the sovereign data bodies that Theo mentioned together. So that is the type of thing that success would look like. You can even then scale it at global scale, but of course there might be issues around certain values and certain ways of organizing your society in bringing data together. That also answers maybe one of the questions that I saw in the chat, if you allow me, Elisa, from Gerard on the liability and the accountability chain. I think in the European Union we can pride ourselves in having a number of legislative instruments, whether that's GDPR, whether it's a data controller, whether it's a software liability directive, or whether it's a number of other things where we, I think, have a very good legal ecosystem in place. But in the end, it is, and that's why it's good to have the private sector represented today as well. It's that partnership from the supply side, from the demand side, to make that work and to make sure that there's not only the legal accountability, which I think the question refers to, but also political accountability in terms of transparency of algorithms, clarity to our political decision makers on how we organize the data space. What does it mean for personal data? A question from Lindsay, how do we bring the people along that are not digital? How do we deal with that? What sort of safeguard measures do we put in place? So that's the whole ecosystem that we're trying to build through this Living in .eu movement. I'll spare you the details with minimum interoperability mechanisms, but it's the type of thing that we're trying to construct. Commission working together with the cities directly, which is quite a unique way of working in the European Union.
Thanks, Eddie. Anyone else on the panel willing to address also the question of how successful collaboration looks like? I see also we have a few questions from the audience, but just to ask before I jump to the questions that I see in our chat box.
No, only thing I would say, I don't want to repeat what everyone else has mentioned, but I can certainly confirm what Theo had mentioned earlier, that a lot of this starts out with, identifying the problem to solve. We need data science exercises, and I'm going to start from that perspective. And I think success here can be measured in many, many different ways. Some of the lessons we've learned over the past year is successful data collaborations, don't always involve new data being created. Successful collaborations, don't necessarily have to focus just on the data sets themselves, but it's also the players that you're bringing in here. It's some of the shifts that we're seeing. And again, we can be flexible along the way with some of that, but the principles are important. The conditions under which, such a collaboration would take place, clarity amongst the stakeholders. But I think the rest has largely been said, and I'm happy to answer some of the other questions.
Thanks, Jeremy. Iman?
Yeah, so look, I think for me, I think cities can definitely have a leadership role in putting out the challenges, and loved what Eddie said, very big vision, that's what you need. You need to have those challenges, those vision. Theo mentioned that, he's seeing the need for collaboration now more than ever over the last 18 months. And I concur with that, because what's happening is there's a technology kind of revolution going on. We hear of Industry 4.0, and that is having an impact everywhere. And the biggest place it can have an impact is in cities. But what I would say about ecosystem and partnering is it's crucial, it's vital, it's very important. Jeremy mentioned our partnership with Microsoft. So that's key for one of the key partnerships for us. That's a standardized partner for us, in that, Microsoft have the expertise in the cloud, and Johnson Controls have the expertise on the equipment side, and to get the data from sensors out into platforms and so on. And that's just one base example. Miko touched on trust and building relationships. I think that's key, very, very important. It can take some time. but getting engaged is the way to start. They would be my views.
Thanks very much. Identifying the key problems and coming up with a shared vision. To sum up your answers to this question. And now I will be moving to the questions that we have from the audience, combining a question from Lindsay Hendricks, consultant at Deloitte, and Ganesh Sauber from DNV, the Netherlands. They both touch upon the question of inclusion and basically how can policymakers, how can stakeholders in this ecosystem make sure that this new technology implementation is inclusive and doesn't feel imposed, so that there is enough citizen engagement. Also, what incentives are there behind the engagement of citizens in improving and reaching pretty much a smart city?
Could I jump in there?
Yeah.
So in London, we're considering precisely these questions, which is why we're developing an emerging tech charter for the city, which will act as a guide for innovators and also consolidate the kinds of questions that elected representatives and public sector buyers should ask when a new technology is deployed, because we're right on the cusp of a whole explosion of technologies that will come through the new digital infrastructure enabled by 5G, really transformational for our city. So that is the structures, kind of what I referred to before as the agile governance that we're putting in place. And this is drawn from our experience that's kind of been developed in silos, some with the police over live facial recognition technology, some with Transport for London over mobility services and autonomy and drones. And all of these things have involved engaging with the public in one way or another. But we as a city haven't kind of drawn that experience together so we can say, hey, this is what good looks like. And good means understanding user need and engaging with citizens all the way through and allowing them, not just communicating to them, but allowing them to communicate back to you during the design process. So we base quite a lot of our thinking along the lines of the government design principles that were established about 7 or 8 years ago in the United Kingdom. But we're taking those principles that were essentially built for kind of how do you design a government digital service and putting them into play when we're saying, okay, well, what happens if we're doing robotics or autonomy? These principles are also really important in how we become more inclusive by understanding that user need right at the start.
Many thanks, Theo. I don't know that Eddie or Miko, perhaps if you'd like to jump on this question. Yes, Eddie.
Yeah, but maybe a comment on working for citizens and working with citizens, because I think we need to make that distinction. I think the questions are absolutely right about inclusivity, not leaving anyone behind. I mean, one of the themes for today is the human-centric approach. And a lot of that, I think the people in the panel, whether that comes from the business side or the government side, are doing a lot of these things for citizens. I don't think that we would want to do a crowdsourcing, including with non-lawyers, about how to design a law, or a crowdsourcing with database design with me involved, for example, because that wouldn't bring much. That's not what we want to do. But there we set a number of values, principles, way we work. That's the stuff that Miko and Thea described, that we actually do for the citizens based on what we understand their values. There's also elements that we do with the citizens, where we, if you take in the European Union, this digital passport, the COVID passport that we're going to get. That is what we're designing with the citizen. In the end, it needs to be easy. And if I see the instructions, I think I can see as a citizen, there's 3 ways I can get it. And in the end, I can even print it on a piece of paper. So that is what you do with citizens, to design it in the way that it works. 2 things, maybe a little bit of fun elements in terms of describing how we have a state of mind, also as civil service, to look at this. I mentioned the local digital twins. And about our president's initiative about the Bauhaus of co-creation, sustainability, and getting citizens involved. And I immediately said, I can imagine with a local digital twin that individual citizens, through virtual reality, would be able to contribute to the design of the city. So that's a conversation we're now having to see how we can do that with citizens. A second, that's even a much smaller gadget and a smaller little thing, that when we design the Living in .eu movement, of course we have the signatories, the mayors, we also have supporters, which includes companies that could support us to say we share that same vision, but also non-EU citizens. And I'm happy to say that Birmingham, for example, is one of the supporters of the movement, and also some of the Norwegian cities. But I also insisted, and that is my personal little thing that I got on this website. I said I would like to include in this website what I call the citizens like. So I'm hoping that at a certain stage, citizens will go there and say, that's an interesting one. And me as an individual, I like what the EU is doing there. Now we're only at I think 7,000 or 8,000 citizens likes out of the 450 million that I aim for. But all I'm saying is, I think both, if I look at the government, Theo, Mikko, and I would have that on the minds to make sure that we do it for the citizens with the values that they have, but also construct where possible the practical applications with the citizens, whether that's a Fix My Street or whether that is a parking app or whatever. You find a lot of these focus panels or focus groups and that we work with. But I think what I have noticed with my peers is that we all have that state of mind to actually involve them in this process.
Many thanks, Eddie. Yes, Mikko, please go ahead.
It's good to continue after what Eddie said. I also believe that we are making services for citizens, and hopefully more and more with the citizens. So I think it is also a big culture change in the city organization to learn more human-centric way of designing services. And as Theo said, it starts from understanding the real user need and engaging users and allowing them to communicate back to us on whatever we are doing. And somehow there needs to be incentives for engagement. It's very hard to engage citizens if they don't see any value in their contribution. So I think the digitalization offers us new ways of engaging citizens. So this is also, I think, a learning process, and through piloting, we can learn best ways to truly understand their real needs and make better services. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mikko. Yeah, I see Jeremy wants to jump on that question.
No, I think it's a really important question, and it depends a bit on the type of data outcomes and collaborations you may be discussing. I think there are some circumstances that matter there, but the keywords for me are transparency and again demonstrating the benefits of this. If you think about the health context in particular, I mean, there's overwhelming polling from citizens that would be willing to provide more health data towards certain type of health research and outcomes that would be driven. I think that's understandable. There's a lot of kind of altruism there. I think where you can also see an understandable degree of sensitivity is when they're just asked to give data without having any idea who's going to be accessing it, what it's going to be used for, where it's going to find itself. It's night and day difference there. So transparency is key about what type of data is being requested, how is it going to be protected, what is it going to be used for, and then on the other end, showcasing some of the benefits that can come from this type of data provision and the contributions from citizens. So if it's in a health context, demonstrating how the provision of such data led to researchers coming out with updated protocols or updated research that goes towards curing disease. We get a lot of examples in that health context. But the key words for me would be transparency, and then really highlighting the use cases so that people understand and see some of those benefits more tangibly.
Thank you, Jeremy. If no one else wants to comment on that question, then I have actually one question here that I see again from Lindsay, which is addressed to Jeremy and Eamon. How do big companies like Microsoft or Johnson Controls decide how data is shared, given the competition implications, but also some of the challenges around data collection, some of the technical standardization and compatibility challenges that can come in the way of data sharing.
So just on that, before I jump into that, just on the previous discussion, which was very interesting, the incentives to consumers can come by empowering them and can come also by giving them a very good experience. And if people get those things, they will be incentivized. On a practical basis, let me give you an example, a very, very brief example. So you know, if you've got the ability to demonstrate that your building is achieving sustainability goals through visualization, and your city inhabitants see that, you know, they will appreciate that and they will feel good about that. Also, from an occupant experience point of view, you can empower people in cities to use less electricity, to see what levels of indoor air quality they're experiencing in the major buildings and things like that. So there are very tangible things that can be done to incentivize citizens and make citizens feel good and get citizens to have a good experience. But to move on to your question relating to the data element and sharing of the data, there are a few things. Fundamentally, cybersecurity is very important in this discussion, because you need to have the standards in place and the relevant cybersecurity technology and technical elements and standards that you're meeting, such as SOC 2 and so on, in place, so that data is secured. You know, because obviously sharing it you're going to be sharing it with people that you trust, but obviously you don't want people that you don't trust to be able to try and get your data and to hack into your data. And if they do, that it's going to be secure and you're going to be protected. So I think that's the first thing. And then we have legislation in different regions, such as the European Union, GDPR, and so on and so forth. And like Johnson Controls will adhere to all of those standards and all of those regulations and consider all of those when we're working within certain jurisdictions and where data should be held and so on and so forth. I refer to the partnership with Microsoft. I'm sure Jeremy wants to come in on that basis. So we work very closely on that and where we would locate our platform data with companies like Microsoft.
And happy to pick up on where Eamon just left off, Lisa. I think the privacy and security points that he made, I would argue, are consistent across just about any data sharing collaboration or activity. Depending on the activity, the answer to Lindsay's question there, may be a bit different. The different scenarios that we're talking about, if it's more of an open data scenario or a private initiative, that is often kind of worked out between the parties. At least from our side, and these are customer-oriented discussions. You can imagine you're only able to go so far as the customer is comfortable, and the customer is only going to feel comfortable if they're using, and you've done a good job of describing the type of technologies that would be used, the type of controls that would be put in place, all of the relevant detail to kind of ensure that there's confidence in this project in the first place. But it does depend a little bit from one scenario to the next. That said, trust is kind of key here. You want to be working with the right players with, the right levels of transparency and the right level of detail. I think what's interesting for us when we think about this data sharing opportunity, we always look at, well, what are customers saying about why they're not willing to share data? And we try to address those problems. So when you hear why citizens or enterprises are reluctant to share data, you hear things like, I don't know how, I really don't know where to begin. I don't know which tools to use, where to find them, etc. I'm scared of losing my IP. I'm scared of helping out my competition, potentially losing trade secrets. I'm scared about legislation that I don't understand. There's privacy risks, there's security risks. I don't want to do something inadvertently that I'm actually not allowed to do. So there's a lot of legal questions that come up there. And so you have to try to address each of those, providing some of the legal certainty, without forcing everyone to hire more lawyers, but being able to provide a framework that's clear so you know exactly what type of further use is permitted. I think technology is really exciting to now address some of the reservations around losing IP and trade secrets. Technology and some of the platforms that have been developed in different, even academic streams, around ways to address privacy and IP and trade secrets, where you can provide access to data for the purpose of pulling out the insights and pulling out the outcomes without necessarily providing access to the raw data itself. I can provide Eddie a sufficient data set that doesn't have the raw data. He'll never have access to the raw data itself, but it may be sufficient for the calculations and the analytics that he wants to run on top of that to drive the outcomes that he needs. For certain scenarios, you can think of practices like differential privacy, where we talk about injecting a bit of noise into data sets that sacrifices a bit of accuracy, but promotes a lot more privacy. And for certain scenarios, that can be a terrific way to address some of those reservations about privacy and others and still get accurate outcomes that are sufficient for a particular project. So it really depends, but data use agreements, legal certainty, and working with partners that you trust, I think are at least the best way of maybe answering Lindsay's question more directly.
Can I just jump in and just say that, I think certainly from a city perspective, city politicians and senior leaders need to be, they need to sort of finish the journey on technology. It's no longer okay to say we use technology because it helps us sort us out our back office costs and things like that. So this is actually a major part of delivery today, and all the debates we have over data are really, really important. So cities and governments knowing their technology mix, how much of it is open source, how much of it is proprietary, why has that been chosen, what's their view on the legacy, what's the relationship between legacy technology and data. There are a range of contractual settings that are standard in industry which prevent public sector organizations accessing their own data without a cost. And so, we need to tackle these and transcend these customs that have essentially grown over the years that stop us getting access to useful data, and also have greater confidence in the kind of technology we deploy on behalf of citizens. It's now a civic conversation, not a technology conversation.
Apologies, I was muted. Many thanks, Theo. Indeed, a civic conversation in order to have a wider citizen engagement and make technology more inclusive in that regard. I saw Eddie raised his hand, but as I see, we are also approaching the end of our session. I would like to use this opportunity to ask you for a 30-second to a minute maximum, if you can keep it really short, for any concluding comments you might have in terms of how we should reinvent indeed life in European cities, making the best use of data, but also following a human-centric approach. And I would start with Eddie.
Let me do the two things. Maybe bounce on what Theo said and then do the concluding remark, and then you don't have to come back to me anymore. So I think one element maybe to add to that is also market management of data. I mean, we spoke technology, we spoke citizen protection, but there's also market management to avoid dominant positions through data. I think that's a very important thing also in our procurement. How do we manage that? And that is also very political, of course. That's what I wanted to add. As a conclusion, I would say, I think you've seen from the panel how aligned we are, and we're not all from the European Union. We come from various parts of the world, and even if you were to have Asians in there, how aligned we are on the need to bring ourselves around it, on the sharing, the interoperability, the open conversation that we have from both the business side and the government side. We have a unique opportunity now to shape this, because 10 years down the road, we might be too late, and there might be things having developed that we really didn't want to see developing. So I love the alignment that I found around some of the themes that we discussed today, and there's great potential for working on this further.
Thank you, Eddie. Please feel free to go. I would say Nico next.
So to be successful in data sharing and citizen engagement, I start by saying that we need to have legal and political framework in place that enables interoperable data and human-centric use of data. And I believe that this is exactly what Commission is doing, and this is to the right direction. Secondly, we need to have budgetary resources to make it happen in practice, and we have to commit ourselves to human-centric principles and values and transparency, as pointed several times in the discussion, and actively collaborate with all stakeholders to make more interoperable human-centric solutions from day one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikko. Iman?
Thank you. So to a large extent, I see like we almost have a perfect storm. So we have big government completely on board. We heard Eddie speak about the vision, but we also have funding incentives. Corporate is there because, you know, earlier I expressed the reasons why corporates, it's in their interests from a profitability point of view, from a talent point of view, from a doing the right thing point of view, policy, sustainability, to tackle and be on the sustainability journey. And then we have visionary cities like London and Helsinki that believe in the digital agenda, that have CDOs like Theo and Mikko. And I think it's this combination of green and digital that comes together. And really, we're tackling the climate crisis and climate change in cities through this agenda. And I think it's going to be very exciting.
Indeed. Jeremy, your concluding remarks?
It's a lot of pressure. Listen, I think we talked a little bit earlier about how to make this tangible for citizens, this is a mindset and a culture shift that we're all trying to drive. You know, the questions about where the reluctance is for people to be more open. You know, it's going to take time to make people feel comfortable with this. And I think they're going to feel comfortable and will see the opportunity that can be seized and participate in that when they have more transparency about what's happening with their data and they see the type of outcomes that it can provide. I think cities are almost, you know, a tremendous starting point for that, because you're talking about, you know, a lot more proximity to the citizens where they can see exactly changes that happen and results that come from this type of data collaboration. And I think it's a fantastic starting point. So I agree on a lot of the alignment we've heard today, and the devil's always in the details of some of the policy on this. But I think the more we can showcase use cases that are successful, and we have a lot from the cities, the more exciting this will be.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Theo, you will be the last one on the panel to share your key message towards the end of our session.
Well, I'll be brief. I mean, I just reflecting on what Eddie has said. I mean, I think from a London perspective, we can't really progress on this agenda without partnerships with our fellow European cities. I already work very closely with Mikko. We work closely with Milan and Amsterdam as well. And we as cities are all on a journey. There are lots and lots of things that we're trying to do, which are very, very common. And how we talk to each other and how we get involved in programs with each other is really important, because we're learning from each other all the way. And just sort of riffing on what Eamon and Jeremy have said, that it's really, you know, it's this role of the cities, which we will see these new use cases emerge, which, not taking anything away from national governments and their legislative powers and all of that stuff, but it's the experience of those use cases, which I think should be really influential in how we craft future laws around this, because I think there are lots of trade-offs here, but I think we can get the balance right so we can innovate responsibly with purpose.
Great way to finish our discussion. Innovate in a responsible way, with a common vision, having an agile government with transparency, privacy, and cybersecurity at the core of this reinvention of our cities. I would like to thank our 5 speakers today for all these great insights, for such an exciting, very engaging discussion. Thank you very much to all of you, and to the Forum Europe conference audience, please stay tuned with us. We will continue after our session with the connectivity, computing, power, digital infrastructure, and domain integration, building the digital backbone of the smart green city. Following up next, right after our session. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Nice to see everyone.